Hi, this is Cherie, and welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness, a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. And today we're going to get really real with Morgan Hagey on perfectionism and how that toxicity can literally affect your mental health, your sociality, your relationships, all that stuff. And I've talked about this before when I had Jane Clayson Johnson on, and we talked about some cultural things relevant to religion and how sometimes those things can perpetuate within religion. So we kind of follow that discussion a little bit more today with Morgan, because she is of the same faith, Mormons, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We don't really go into a huge detail about it, but we do talk about performance-based worth and the appearance of being perfect and performing that way with your house, your body, your marriage, motherhood, and how that can be perpetuated, especially within religious constructs or tight-knit communities and high-demand religions. So we'll get into that. But first, I want to remind you that I have a really amazing 6-part Mary Magdalene series coming, where I have some really powerful guests and where I'm going to share some of my pilgrimages traveling overseas on these sacred pilgrimages. So you'll want to tune into that. That's coming up in July. And also go to my website, CherieBurton.com. You can check out some of my new products. I've got some beautiful Soul Essentials affirmation cards that can really be a great support tool as you continue to up-level and step into your authenticity and kind of shine in your space. So here we go with Morgan. Morgan, so happy to have this conversation. What I have gleaned about you thus far, just from our limited exchange, I'm just like feeling you're already a soul sister.
I think so. Yeah, I feel the same way. That's so cool.
So you have 7 children. The oldest is 13. They pretty much, I'm just going to tell our listeners, 13, 11, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. I was telling you, I have a sister who has 8 kids, 13 and under. So she's got one on you, but that's
and she can win. That's fine. I'm clocked out. It's fine.
Yeah. You're like, I'm done. And she is too, by the way, but it's just, I'm amazed by that. First of all, can I just go there first? Because that's just speaking the loudest to me. Like, did you want did you really, was this something that you always dreamed about, having a big family and sort of just having a bunch of kids? And tell me about how this has evolved for you.
How did this happen?
I kind of know how it happened, but
I'm figuring, I won't go into those details. It's all right. So I was raised so I am third of 6. And my parents had 4 daughters, and then they had a son, and then my youngest brother is adopted. My mom always said there is nothing more fun than a house full of kids. So I was really raised on that mentality. Like, we weren't a burden. She enjoyed us. We had I have very, very fond memories. I had a wonderful childhood. And so for me, it was sort of like always a given. Like, I remember when I was 12 and I was like, oh, I feel like my calling is to be a mother. And I remember having a talk with my best friend at the time, and she's still a dear friend of mine. And she's like, I don't ever want to have kids. And we were 12, like, we talked about weird things, but I was like, I know I want to be a mom. I know it. And that was like my testimony. And so when I met my, husband, before he was my husband, he was raised in a family of 5, and same kind of a situation, had a wonderful upbringing. And so for us, it was just kind of like, we are here to do the Lord's work. And if that includes having a lot of kids, then we will. We always said between 5 and 7. I had some really, really big struggles after number 5 was born. She's our first daughter. So we had 4 boys and then a girl. And I had 3 miscarriages. I lost a little baby boy halfway through pregnancy. And so we just thought, well, maybe we're done. Like, maybe that was it. And that was incredibly difficult to accept, because that wasn't my choice. Like, that wasn't where I was. But, we did the tests and we did, so it was so much. But, the Lord blessed us with number 6, and we thought, okay, we're done. We've come and done, we've multiplied and replenished. And then both my husband and I just really felt like there was one more. And we're so grateful that we did, because she's our second daughter, and we just can't imagine without her now. So
yeah.
So it was planned, but also kind of like, we always said, we'll just take it one kid at a time. Like, we're never going to be like, we're only going to have this many, or we are going to have this many. It was just sort of and now we both feel very, very happy and thrilled to be done and be moving forward and to have our house full.
Yeah. You have the proverbial quiver of children. And, whenever I'm over at my whenever I'm over at my sister's, I'm just like, wow, it's so intense with all the children. I love it though. We had 7 children in my home growing up and I'm second oldest. So
yeah.
I always wanted the Brady Bunch, and I got the Brady Bunch, 3 boys and 3 girls, but in a very, very unconventional way. And so I love.
Well, but the Brady Bunch was unconventional too. So
yeah, it is. It's
so there you go.
Not every girl dreams of that, I guess. But I was just like you. My mom was a great mother, and she was creative and nurturing, and I was just like, I want to have 6 kids like my mom. And then my mom ended up adopting our cousin because my dad's sister committed suicide. And in her suicide letter asked my parents to raise her 3-year-old son. So that's how my mom got her 7th child. And I, by that time,
wow, my little brother was adopted too.
Really?
Wow.
So you never know. I just wanted to ask that because I'm sure, it's defined you in many ways of, children are teachers and they certainly bring us a lot of life lessons and patience and the development of patience is a big one for me. Okay. Yeah. So you have this book, Practicing Perfection. And we're going to have some links here for people to find that. You can get it on Amazon, but tell me, give us a little kind of snapshot into the life you were living, or what brought you to the point where you're like, okay, I need to write this.
Yeah. So my husband and I, we've been married, well, it'll be 16 years next month. And in order to pursue his higher education, we've moved a lot. We started our marriage out in Utah, BYU, the classic love story, although we did not get married 6 weeks after we met, but we would have, my mother would have let us. So I just have to say we would have. And so, we just kind of bounced around the country. And so in that bouncing, we encountered people from every walk of life in every kind of ward and branch, and neighbors who were LDS, nobody's LDS, all that kind of stuff. And so
and just for our listeners who aren't familiar with the term LDS, it's so interesting. We're not even supposed to say Mormon or LDS anymore. I'm rebelling against that because
I can't. It's so automatic.
I know, me too. So it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sometimes abbreviated LDS. And it's also referred to as the Mormon Church, but I don't know the short way to say it now. If we're not supposed to say LDS or Mormon, I'm kind of like, that's too many syllables.
Right.
I'm sticking with Mormon.
Right. Well, and if you say members of the church, that doesn't clarify.
It's polarizing because there's other churches.
Yeah. Exactly. So LDS might slip out. I try to stop the Mormonism part of it. In fact, actually, before this book went to print, I had to go through and remove the word Mormon from it in several different places. I'm like, I better just fix it. I don't want to cause problems for people. So so I did. But yes, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we moved a lot and we experienced lots of different congregations. And so that's where this book was born. 6 years ago, we moved from Utah to New England, to New Hampshire. And we had 5 little kids at the time. And my husband was starting his very first, he's a PhD now, real job. And so I was very isolated. We lived in the woods and I didn't have any support. I was just by myself. And so I hadn't really made any friends. I hadn't found my footing. And so I was really lonely. And I felt like if we could be more real with people, if people knew me, maybe I could have those connections and maybe we could be friends. And so that's kind of where this started. And then one day it just came to me and I was like, I need to write this book. I told my husband I need to write this book. And so I sat down and started writing it. And it took me 5 years to edit.
So what were the feelings you were experiencing that led up to having to get it down? Because I'm kind of I'm writing a book too, and there's a lot of things I'm processing and noticing and I'm more awake to. So what was that for you?
So it's a long process, and I'm sure you're finding that as you go. As throughout the years of us moving around and bouncing around, I had tried many different like avenues to kind of make money to help our family because, grad school is expensive, and we started grad school with 0 children and we finished it with 5. And so it was a really long journey. And so I'd been a writer my whole life. And so I'd started to kind of dabble in, at the time in the early 2000s when kind of like 2007 timeframe when blogging exploded, and everybody had a blog, and I had a blog, and my sister and I shared a blog. And it was like a how-to kind of a blog. And I realized as I went along, we only did that for a few years. I felt like there was too much how-toing in the world and not enough just being grateful for what we already have. But it's such a hard line to walk because as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we are always told, always, to be striving to be better. And so I was like, how I don't feel qualified, even though I have good ideas and I have all these kids and I have tons of experience. I don't want to tell people what to do. I think we have too much of that. And so that's kind of where it started. And so this book is totally telling people what to do, but it just is. But what I did is I tried to ground it in scripture and in what Jesus's words are for us and what that truthfully really is, not what we water it down to be, not what we berate ourselves and force ourselves to think that we're not good enough through, using scripture as a weapon, but instead saying, no, like where you are at this exact moment, the choices that you've made, plus, God's divine power have put you in this place, and that's okay. That's a good thing. You don't have to be stressing about you're not 5 years down the road or that person has accomplished more than you or whatever. And so that is what really got it started. And then again, living in the isolation that we did, and we lived there for 6 years, and it was a wonderful place. But right when we moved there, it was really hard for me. And so, cause I'd left my whole family and, so feeling like nobody's there for me. I'm by myself.
I know that feeling. When we moved across states, we lived in a 40-acre piece of property that my husband was trying to develop. Yeah. We had no neighbors. And this was like 2008 or 2009. And it was a real sacred time. Just to kind of check in and go, I need to be with this loneliness because it's teaching me something. And so I filled journals, and I often reflect on those journals, and I'm like, oh, that could be a book.
Yeah, it really, and that's really what this is.
So you were noticing, because I remember I talked to you before, it was like you were noticing some real universal themes that troubled you in all of the different places you've lived. And I've lived a lot of different places too. So let's go there, and then we'll kind of build from there.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the things that, and when I say this, and I feel like I have to put the caveat on it, this is not me standing outside and pointing my finger. I live this every day. And so this is my people, my culture, my life, my own experiences that have absolutely taught me this. And so I don't want anybody to be like, oh, well, she's just being judgy, because that's really not what it is. This is me absolutely embracing my sisters and saying, I am standing in this exact same place right here with you.
Right.
So there you go. But like, so the things that I really hit hard on in the book is identity, is who are you and who are you portraying to the world? So we talk about social media and what your house looks like. Like, is it clean? Is it dirty? Do you feel judged by that? And then at church. So when you attend meetings with these people that some you don't have a lot of interactions with outside of a Sunday meetings. And some people you get close to, of course, but generally speaking, it's a lot of times very surface. So that, and then we talk about your body and the physical stress and the demand of the world to look a certain way, to be a certain size. And then marriage. My husband is a marriage and family therapist, so I feel like it's always under a microscope at our house. So people are always like, oh, wow, does he try to use his techniques on you? And I'm like, he knows better than that. But it does, marriage is such a huge and important part of our church culture that it does sometimes end up under a microscope. And then to add to that, then I talk about motherhood. So because when we believe as members of this church that motherhood is the highest calling for a woman, I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? Like, it's the most important thing you're ever going to do. Don't screw it up. And then we screw it up and then we feel terrible about it.
I actually disagree with that. I don't think it's the most important thing a woman can do.
I don't either, but that's what we're told a lot.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think we could totally talk about that because we are, and I don't think this is just within religious cultures. I think this is kind of going back to like, it just reminds me of like 1950s housewife kind of, mentality.
Yep.
Where,
right. And so when you believe that,
if you operate from the paradigm that the highest possible role or capacity or gift giving, and I'm talking from a spiritual standpoint, that you could hope to attain now and in the eternities is motherhood. And we don't feel quite adequate in that role. And that's supposed to define us. That can be, and then that's our eternal destiny and, whatever. That's like, whoa. That's what propelled me to come up with my own version of divine order, which is God, self, family, humanity, earth. And that's also scriptural. But I think when you are in a close-knit community, and especially with other women, the conversation is going to turn to, look what my kids are doing, or what they're not doing, and internalizing that and making it about your state of spirituality. That's where I see that women really kind of getting, it's not frustrated is not the word. It's almost like a spiritual depression. And
for sure.
Yeah. So you were noticing these things that when we talk about the world, the world standards of your body, the world standards of your house, the world standards of what a marriage should be, what are your world standards of what motherhood should be. How there's that, right? But how did you see it really, like, how did you see the intensity factor of those domains within the church community? How was it like? I see, like, on steroids is what I call it. Like in our culture, it's all that stuff on steroids. Even though we say we're not of the world, like all Christianity is saying we're in, but not of the world. But yet we bring that in on steroids oftentimes in these tighter knit communities.
So yes, that's exactly what happens. So I think that what happens is we have we have the world standards, and then we have our very specific Latter-day Saint standards. And if you actually look at them, a lot of times they kind of overlap. So in a weird way. So like, for instance, physical health, right? We take, if we're going to be exacting in our living the scriptures, then we live by a code of health that ideally would keep us all in tip-top physical shape. So that's the church. That's the Latter-day Saint version. And then you look at the world version, which says that your value is based on your physical shape, whether it's a size that someone thinks you should be, or that you go to CrossFit 6 times a week, or whatever it is. So then we take what we believe, which is true. We need to take care of our bodies because they're a gift, and they're, we believe that the spirit dwells in our body. Therefore, we need to take care of it. And we take the worldview, which is, and you're only of value if you look a certain way, and we slap them together.
Yeah.
And how is that not going to become completely paralyzing to a person? So on the, God wants you to do this, and everybody else does too, and you're not, and you're failing, and it's
And good
so
luck
it becomes
with that, because
huge.
Well,
and that's true of anything. That's true of motherhood. Like, look at, okay, I have a job. I'm not doing exactly what the church says that I should be doing, because our church stands for, mother, like you said, motherhood first and foremost, but I have a job. So I'm supposed to be balancing, which I say with very heavy sarcastic air quotes, motherhood and my job. And I'm supposed to be perfect at both of them. And that's just not reality. It's not possible. But we put the world and our own spiritual views together, and it becomes paralyzing and overwhelming and depressing, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to our credit, I think it's just because in our heart, we want to really do the right thing. Like we can see when women have this innate gift of wisdom of being able to see the whole picture, even if this is physiological. This happened in the Garden of Eden with Eve, but it's actually a physiological thing. The female brain is more lit up in more areas than the male brain. And we have this ability to see the whole deal. And so because we have this innate capacity to see everything, we can get overwhelmed, and we can always feel like we're falling short of the big picture.
Right.
And it gets reinforced. It gets reinforced at church, unwittingly. Like, it's not diabolical.
Yeah.
It's just, it happens.
For sure. And the other thing is because we're trying so hard. And I talked, before I wrote this, I sent out surveys to a fairly large group of Latter-day Saint women from all around the United States. And I just remember one of the women that sent it back, she said, I don't really have a problem with this, but my sister just completely quit going to church because of these exact issues, because she could not be perfect. She felt like that was what was expected of her, and she was always going to fail. So she figured, why should she even bother? Why should she even try? So she just quit, which to me is tragic, because I think, if we're going to talk about Christianity in all of this, then that is unfortunately leaving Jesus entirely out of the picture, which is my entire point.
And I know women who've made that choice as well. And sometimes,
and I don't blame them.
And I try not to be in a place of judgment around that, because they may need to do that for their mental health, to find Jesus their own way. Because if grace is de-emphasized, like it can be in our culture, and they find grace outside the borders, they're more likely to be accepting and loving of themselves. I feel like, maybe that's their path. At the same time, I can see how there's a great sense of conflict within a woman if she feels like her worth is tied up in religious activity. And just to give you an example, when I was pregnant with Noah, my son, who's now 22, I was just finishing my university studies in psychology, and I was really, really pregnant. But I worked in a psychiatric, it was a psychiatric hospital, but there was a very specific wing. It was called the renewal unit. And I was a group therapist there, and it was specifically for LDS patients, because they wanted to have more of a spiritual approach to their recovery. So one, I just will never forget this, because this happened 22 years ago, 23 years ago. I will never forget this woman. She was a Relief Society president. For those of you who are not of our faith, Relief Society is one of the largest, if not the largest, women's organizations in the world. And it's specific to our faith. It's a vast organization of women that do acts of service, and it's just part of our Sunday curriculum as well. But anyway, this woman, she was a Relief Society president, and she literally had a nervous breakdown. She was extremely perfectionistic. And I remember just looking at her and feeling so much compassion, because she was like, not only am I done with the church, I'm done with life. And as we climbed more and more into where she was at, everyone in the group resonated in that particular unit. They were all there under very similar pretenses, or not pretenses, but very similar themes around that perfectionism thread. They were all very perfectionistic, both the women and the men, but especially the women. But this woman in particular was saying, I just can't do it anymore. I just can't keep, and her checklist was a mile long. And she felt like, here's all the checklist things that I have to do as a Relief Society president. Here's all the checklist things I have to do to be a good mom. Here's all the checklist things I have to do to, serve my kids' community, my neighborhood as well, my community and my kids' school. And it was just like, no, she would rather just say, I'm done. Yeah. I'll let the chips fall as they may, like I'm done. And having, you probably don't know this, Morgan, but I lost a sister to suicide, who left behind 5 children for very, very similar reasons.
Yeah.
And
no, I didn't actually know that. I did because I listened to your podcast with
with Jane. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did hear
so I guess I see the mental health part of it because I'm close to that. But for someone who doesn't even struggle necessarily maybe with like clinical mental health issues,
right.
There's still that soul sickness, like that spiritual disconnection, which can lead to a mental illness, in my view. But it starts with just, here's the standard over here. Here's the gold standard. Here's what I'm striving for and striving for and striving for. And it's the striving, as you say, it's the trying, right? That I feel like people just, it's a rat race. It's a hamster wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to mental illness, but if you are already susceptible to that, or if you end up in a place where it becomes that, then you don't have any way out of that. And that's why she probably, the relief study president that you're talking about, felt that way, because she didn't see it until it was almost too late. She didn't see that she was in this rat race, that she was on this hamster wheel that she couldn't get off of. And the reality is that you can get off of it. You can. And that is my message, really, is what it comes down to, is that if you truly believe that you are here on this earth for a reason, and I know a lot of us don't necessarily always find out why that is, even in my 30s, I'm just now finding that out. But if you truly believe, even if you don't know what it is, that your loving heavenly parents have put you here for a reason, specific and unique to you, then why are we so worried about matching a standard that is sort of very general?
Right.
Like, I'm not, and I admit this, and I'm 35 and I'm just now figuring out who the heck I am, but I am not a black and white thinker. So I think that people who are more black and white in their thinking struggle with this even more, because it's supposed to be this way and it has to. And I'm like, what are you going to do? For me, it's try your best, give it to the Lord, and then try again tomorrow, and give yourself the grace to say, well, screwed that one up, back at it tomorrow.
So
but
the byline, and that reminds me of the byline of your book, Let Grace Work in Your Life. I was just looking at that.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like that's just the goal? I mean, I think we misunderstand the principle of grace a lot of times. It's like, what is that? It's a force. The way I define it is it's an actual power. It's not just an idea. It's an energy that flows into your being when you surrender. And this is something that I have been processing. This is one of the reasons I am really fired up with being more open about the feminine and the feminine face of God, and God the Mother, Heavenly Mother, Divine Feminine, whatever you want to call it. That is the grace. That is the mercy and the flow of, and the literal breath of life. And if we just surrender to that, and what I mean by surrender is just like, hey, time out. I don't know what to do. And I am not feeling that I have the capacity right now to do this. That's when it's like grace is like, yeah, you're good. That's enough. If all you can do right now is breathe, that's enough.
Wow. And just going off of that, when you call it the feminine aspect of that, you think about in the scriptures how often Jesus is referred to as the hen who gathers her chicks under her wing. And I've always thought about that as, Jesus was a male, and as members of our church, we believe that God is a literal male as well. God the Father, but we also believe that there is that feminine power. And so to think that if Christ represents all of us, he has to contain that within his godly side. And so that means that Heavenly Mother, the divine feminine, existed literally in his body when he was here, and it continues to touch the earth and the people here at all times and in all ways. And so when you think about grace and as Christ gathering us under her wings, I think that allows us to feel like we can be identified with. It can be hard as a woman to be like, well, you don't get it. You're a dude, to our higher ups. Because in our church, the highest of offices are held by men.
And
so
old men at that, they've never been mothers.
Yes, exactly. And bless, Russell M. Nelson, who is the leader right now, he did say, was it this last 2 conferences ago, that if he became a doctor because he couldn't be a mother, which was very sweet. But it's fact. Like, we are mostly, in terms of decision making, led by men in this church. And so sometimes I feel like we don't feel like we're understood on the feminine level. So I love that you phrased grace in the feminine frame, because I think that's what it is. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. It's like the flow and the force of that beautiful nurturing. Yeah. And just as Christ, as you noted, holds the feminine and the masculine, so do we. And he was like that beautiful balance. And I've interviewed,
it's perfect.
The men that I've interviewed thus far in my podcast, 4 men, I consider to be absolute beautiful balance of the masculine and feminine. All 4 of those men. One was from India, one's down in Sedona doing amazing breathwork retreats, and then these 2 men who had near-death experiences right here in Utah. And I'm like, wow. I think what I see is, this is just me, but I believe that because the feminine has been suppressed for so long, and it actually started in religions, it started way, way back and way medieval and way, 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 way back. I mean, Old Testament times.
From the beginning of time, basically.
Yes. I mean, there was a time where they were worshiping like Sophia in the temples in Egypt and all of that. But sure, there have been periods and stretches of time where that just was eradicated in favor of a patriarchal, sort of equating physical prowess or strength with more spiritual leadership and strength. And so because of the denial of these feminine intuitive gifts and this flow and this grace and this nurturing energy, we have been suffering as a society. My feeling is that entities and institutions have their own masculine and feminine energy balance. And until these institutions and especially religious institutions and governments, until they find the balance of equality with equal parts sacred masculine and divine feminine, there's absolutely no way that this earth is going to be renewed. You could call it Zion or whatever. And so that's my feminism coming out. It's not angry.
I
feminism.
love that. But it's not beautiful. That's what it is.
Well, I just feel like, it's time that, I told you before, like I've been in the closet about my feminism, because I know the perception around how charged that word can be for some people. You think about, protests, marches and whatnot. For me, it's just, hey, why don't we start to come back to the honoring of the spiritual gift expression of women to help heal this world? Because that consciousness is shifting. I'm almost every awakened female I talk to has had some kind of knowing about this. And I would say, especially within the last 2 years, it's gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, because these old structures, these old paradigms, they're crumbling. They're energetically crumbling. Yeah. And so it's going to take some organic, it's going to take organic voices, multi-voices of women and men to say, hey, let's do this a different way. And with that perfectionism, I see that what I see with women is I had to step into my masculine side to start a business. And I didn't realize I was doing that, but I just got really driven with business and just built my business really fast. And also as a mom, so I was trying to balance the feminine, you mentioned working. Sometimes that's frowned upon. So I've been out of balance in both arenas, and I know what it feels like. So it's my feeling is there's a lot of women who are afraid to nurture their masculine side just as much as men are afraid to nurture their feminine side. So we have this great balance.
Well, and I don't think, and I don't want this to be taken as a criticism, but I think that you are correct. And that because of the structures that exist in our current religious institutions. And specifically, I'm speaking from a Latter-day Saint perspective, but I study a lot and I know it's not just us,
Right.
but we have such a strong emphasis on family that I think when we start, if you were to ask someone who is deeply in the church to define like the perfect woman or perfect man, it would be very much along the lines that the church's standards have set. So the man presides and makes the money and protects, and the woman stays home and nurtures. And that's great until it doesn't work for you. Until it doesn't work for you, right? Like I have like putting my husband through graduate school. Like we made that decision years and years and years ago, and so I side hustled and did jobs and started businesses and ran my own stuff because I couldn't go to work at a job because I had these little kids that I had, made and had agreed to raise. And so I had to do kind of a similar thing where I had to dig deep and be like, all right, well, I'm going to do this because I have to. And then I kind of found that I loved it. And I love being out in the world and serving and working alongside my motherhood. And so I think that finding that masculine is scary because it doesn't feel like we're allowed to, which I absolutely despise saying, but it's true. Like, I don't think there's enough, and it's changing. It is absolutely changing. The tide is changing. There was an article, we have a church magazine for the youth called The New Era, and it's for like ages 12 to 18 or 11 to 18 now, I guess. And they had a girl write in and ask about education versus, raising a family. And the article was great. I was impressed. It was basically like, well, you don't know what's going to happen, so do what you want. And if motherhood comes, great. But if not, you've got this great career that you've built, and don't be afraid to go after what you want, and make sure that, marriage and motherhood is hopefully a part of that plan and that journey. But you go, girl, is basically what it was saying. And I was like, all right, that's huge. Because when I was a teenager in the 90s, nope, that would not have happened. That was not. That was not what we were taught. So
I was a teenager in the 80s, and it was you could only ever hope to aspire, and this don't even, it's interesting. There's this life tension that we experience as women. And I know men experience their own set of tension around like trying to balance being a really good father with home because they have careers. But with women, it's a little trickier because we do have that beautiful, nurturing mother's intuition, maternal, for some women that doesn't flow as easily. I've seen that as well, where they don't have desire to have children of their own, or they do have children because they feel like they, should. And then they feel that resentment and they're trying to bring in that. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's not a universal statement that all women have this like, ooh, I want to be a mother. And so if you are only defining a woman through the lens of how she shows up as a mother, and that's the definition of her spirituality, that can be severely damaging. So I'm glad the conversation is changing with this next generation, because I can tell you, and that, well, your oldest is 13, my oldest is 24. And she and my other kids that are older, because I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, but they tell me, they're like, just because it was done this way in your time and in this tradition, in this culture, does not mean we're doing it this way. And all their friends are exactly the same. They are challenging those existing I believe it's their collective mission to tear it down. And I
hope so. Because I've been terrified of it, to have the youth come up and say, we're not doing it this way anymore is amazing, because I was not raised that way. And so to even step outside it, like you said, to be a non-closeted feminist is scary, because there's judgment and it comes at you, and you feel, even if it's not real, you imagine that there's judgment. And so bless these girls and these men who are coming up and saying, we don't like that. That doesn't work for us. We're not going to do it that way. I think that's amazing and so powerful and so telling, like you said, like their collective mission to ring in this new generation and to bring this power to the earth that it so desperately needs.
How would you how would you define feminism for you? Like you identify as a feminist as well. So how would you define that for yourself?
So for me, that's a very long story. I'll be quick. Feminism ultimately has come to mean to me that as a person who was born a female, I have just as much right and ability as anyone who was born a male. So for me, that means that if I want to, for instance, start a business, I can, and I should have the support of my family, the same as a husband who would want to go and do something like that. It means that in our marriage, we divide things as needed. It's not a, well, you're the wife, so there's none of that. There's none of that. He's the one who works full time right now. And that's fine because we decided that. But it's the right to decide, and it's the right to say, I'm a person who takes up space, and I don't have to qualify my space taking up with fulfilling the roles that you tell me that I should.
Okay, cool.
That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think it's archaic medieval thinking to accept that just because our anatomy may be different, that we have to limit our opportunities or the importance of the roles that we play. And my added definition is just advocating for the spiritual gift expression of women, which I believe has honestly, there's not a space in our church right now outside of auxiliary roles and outside of traditional mothering to really, really express the gifts that we have. And this may sound completely heretical. So if you don't agree with me, I'm fine with that. But here we go. I believe that we should have prophetesses. I believe we should have women in the highest meetings, the highest councils, the Holy of Holies, equal representation. And I think that's the way it's in heaven. So why not do it right here? And so, yeah,
I totally
my feminism coming out.
Well, no. And the thing is, I love that you say that, because I think women are afraid to say that. And as someone, as a person, a human person, I feel, and I have felt this my whole life, I've felt called to ministry, which is the way that Christians define, people who go in to become ministers and pastors. I have felt that call my entire life. And so how can I do that when I'm not allowed to? And I've struggled with that my entire adult life. How? That's why I wrote this book. How do I share what I believe God has sent me here to share when I'm not allowed to? And I'm not, I love our church and I'm here for it and I'm here to see it through to the very end. But I also want the same opportunities for my daughters that my sons have. And that's very hard for me as a woman to see, because I can't even change it. I can't even be like, well, I'm just going to break down the glass ceiling and
nope, sorry. Tear it down. Well,
sorry, you can't. You're not in that meeting. The meeting where we're tearing down the ceiling, you're not invited to.
Yeah.
So, so it's hard, but
I think it's just going to take a lot of women who just wake up and go, you know what, this is how I'm going to express God through me, and God the Mother and God the Father through me, and Christ with me. And that organic grassroots empowerment is how change happens from the top. Because when enough
started,
it is. And there are people, this generation, they are leaving kind of en masse. The latest statistics I heard is there's less than 30% activity. In terms of like ages, I want to say like 18 to 30 or something, and single, especially with single LDS adults, it's very, very low. And so they're kind of like, hey, we need to look at the weightier matters here. Let's talk about tolerance, inclusion, policies that support radical inclusion. What do Christ really teach? Like they kind of came that way. It's their group mission. And so I spent a lot of time trying to fight against my older kids, and I'm just listening to them and learning from them, because they truly are advanced souls who are trying to fit this higher law into a construct and an institution that doesn't align with it. So,
well, and if you think about that, like if you think about the idea that certain spirits are sent at certain times, then we have a responsibility as the people who raise them to listen to them.
Absolutely.
That's our job.
Yeah.
And so I think that's amazing. And
one of the biggest reasons I started doing this podcast is because I needed a platform to share what I've heard from women and men and children about truth and how it lives so in such diverse ways, in such unique ways with each soul, and that if we try to homogenize or generalize or make blanket policies or standards, even, I would say, that can kill some people's spirituality, because their path is to be, quite frankly, revolutionizing in their own way. So yeah, it's tricky. I see Jesus a lot different than I used to 5 years ago. It's really evolved. I see him right with Mary Magdalene. I see them as cohorts in teaching the law of love. If you read the non-commodity text with Mary Magdalene, and she was all about that. And he gave her equal power and authority as an apostle with him. And also I see him as superhuman. That's the beauty, the messy piece of all of this, is that what is perfection? Was Christ perfect because he was like completely docile and super humble all the time and like doing everything right? I think his perfectionism was his ability to love, and that's it. That's how I see him now. He had perfect love, and everything else was secondary to how he loved, and he had to grow in that.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense if you think about sin, because why do we sin? Like, what are we, when we define sin, what is it? It's anything that pulls us away from God, which means his love is always there. So if Christ's love is perfect, then all we have to do is lean on that. That's all we have to do. And if we're striving to love like Jesus loved, and in this day and age, that means something super different than I think people think it does. But if we're trying to love the way that Jesus loves, then that is radical. And I love that word to describe it, because that's what it is. And if we're doing that, then we're living up to his requests for us to be perfect. Yeah. When he says, be therefore perfect, even as I am, that's what he means.
Exactly. And we are I am. And when we align with that divine flow and love and grace inside of us, we are better at everything. And it's just so,
let it work.
The reason I see Jesus differently is I had to go out of the box a little bit and just go all over the world, literally and figuratively, in my search of truth. And he has shown up in so many different ways for so many different cultures, not just, 19th century America, and how we define that. I think too, when we're looking at, he was about, yes, he had his traditions. He was born into the Jewish tradition. But he didn't get baptized into that tradition. He went to John the Baptist, who was out in the wilderness preaching. And, if you really, really look at the New Testament, he was that voice, that revolutionary, that like, hey, I'm going to teach things a new way. There's all these policies and laws and perfection stuff going on. Remember that man that came to him and said, okay, Jesus, just give it to me straight. Like, just tell me, what do I need to do? And that was the qualifier, right? And Christ is like, well, there was two scenarios. One was like, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. But then the other scenario was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Love was everything he taught. Love, love, love. If you want to know what to do, it's love. So I see Jesus now in his perfection as not like this, like untouchable, removed. I don't see him that way. I see him as completely down to earth, hilarious, funny, and just real and loving and human. He's still in touch with his humanness. That's why he still bears the scars in his hands. Like he gets life, and he gets the plight of women. And for me, I kind of feel the shift, and what I had to experience in my travels too, looking into the faces of so many different types of people and backgrounds, is like, I can see Christ in that person and that person and that person. And it was like, oh, okay, then it's not as whitewashed as I thought it was. It's just real.
No, we've just done that to ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, because
totally.
think about what he did. Jesus didn't kick it with just the people who were rich and powerful and clean. And he made it a point. He went out of his way to make sure that we understand that that is not how we're supposed to live our lives.
Yes, that was the real teaching is like, do you want to know a new way? Would you like to know a new way to do this? And it's so simple, but I think we don't want it to be simple. We want the checklist. Like,
We like them. They're
like you
comforting.
said, we've been so programmed to like get steps and tips. And what did you say at the beginning? You notice that everybody's giving all this practical advice, right? And it paralyzes. How-tos. And I'm guilty of that. I give people how-tos all the time because my brain wants to my left brain.
So do I. I wrote a book about it. Yeah. And the cool thing is there's this really, really neat Christian writer. He's not a Latter-day Saint. His name is Bob Goff, and he's written a couple of different books. And it's all about, he wrote, it's called Love Does, and the other one is called Everybody Always. And it's all about, it's like, if you're going to love people the way Jesus loved people, you're going to be inconvenienced. You're going to have to go off script. You're going to have to be willing to step out of the path that you're walking, that you're so determined to walk on, and be like, I got to go this way for just a second. I'll be right back, and go take care of whatever it is that Christ has put in your path. And I'm trying that. It's hard, especially when you are a mother and when you do have a job to do and when you've got lists, because the world demands that you take care of your list and the church demands you take care of your list. It is crazy hard to be like, I'm going to be inconvenienced and go take care of this super random problem that I just happened to notice at my neighbor's house or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But if you practice that, and that's what I mean by practicing, if you make the effort, it becomes a little easier to notice and it becomes a little more natural as part of your behavior to say, I'm going to go where Jesus is telling me to go, even though it makes zero sense.
Zero sense. Yeah. And one of my spiritual mentors taught me many years ago that when the Spirit prompts, it's never convenient. And that was like,
oh my goodness,
a game changer for me, because I was like, you just assume that the Spirit's going to wait for all things to line up for you to move and act. But God is always wanting our growth first and our comfort second. And it's not that he doesn't want us to feel peace and comfort, but he wants us to grow and expand. And I love what you said about going off script and being unconventional, because it kind of aligns with that whole hey, if you really want to help people and serve people in the highest way, it will be out of the box. It will not be tradition. It will be something new for that soul, for those people. It's what they're hungry for. And I think people are really starving right now. There's never been an age where we had more information with the advent of the internet and all of that. And even religious, I can't remember the word I'm thinking of, but people that expound on religious texts and essays, and there's just so much. And it's man, it's like that really study president in the renewal psych unit. It's it's too much. But when you just whittle it down, it's what is the Spirit telling me right now? How do I stop, time out? How do I connect back? Like you said, sin is just disconnection from God. So how do I connect back in, and how do I move in the way that God is wanting me to move right now? That's actually a Buddhist teaching. And that's why I say I'm part Buddhist, because I didn't realize I was part Buddhist till I started studying mindfulness. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes tons of sense. We don't get mindful in this church. In this church culture, we do not do mindfulness very well at all.
No, we're way too busy for that.
Yeah. Too busy. It's oh yeah, just go, go, go. Okay. This is awesome. So what parting words was this before we didn't cover every topic under the sun?
I know. My parting words would just be what we said. If you are bogged down by this feeling that you can't do it, that you're not enough, that you're failing in whatever arena, all arenas, whatever it may be, you need to take a hard look at at why that is. And you need to stop and breathe and let Christ do his job and say, I'm not going to be perfect at this. I'm not going to be perfect at anything, but I am not going to quit. And I'm going to keep trying. And I'm going to let myself be imperfect and find the joy in that. And this isn't a depressing thing. It's joy. There's so much joy in saying, I can't manage all this. Oh, well, it's so joyful to give it over to Christ and say, you're going to have to help me. And he does. And there's so much grace that you can feel and that peace that comes. And I fail every single day. I'm not perfect at anything, but I'm joyful because I know that Jesus has me, and that's what matters.
Beautiful. Well, those are great parting words. And I'm just going to just remind everyone to get your book. It's like under $7.
Yeah, it's a little book. It's only about 100 pages. It was just,
I like literally ordered it while we were talking. I was multitasking.
Right. That's what Amazon one-click buy is for.
Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for keeping it real. You inspired my friend Melissa so much out in New Hampshire. She's one of my business associates, and she's like, you got to talk to her. So I
love me some Melissa.
I know. I tell everybody, I hope she's listening to this. I'm sure she will. I have a saying like that. We have a mutual friend who Melissa worked for before, and she used to tell me before I knew Melissa, she goes, everyone needs a Melissa. And then when she and I started doing business together, now I tell everybody, everyone needs a Melissa. So yeah, she's like us. She's like, hey, she just told me the other day, she had this thing on her wall, like motherhood is your highest calling or something. And she's like, every time I looked at it, I thought I was going to throw up. She goes, I finally just took it down. And she's like, no, my highest calling is to be a daughter of God. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Well, Thank you, Morgan. This was awesome. I think perfectionism is something that we're always going to be up against as women, and just that whole standard of, because we do see it all or most of the picture. And so I think what you're saying is just releasing your burden to the Lord and finding a way to breathe it out of you and let him take it. And that's like that grace of like, it's sufficient. Like, you're good. I've got this. And so that's the beauty of life, is trying to find that and access that power that comes from that surrender. So.
Yep. And he's there.
Well, have fun with your 7 children today. I'll have fun with my 5 children today.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you.
Check out Morgan's book, Practicing Perfection, Let Grace Work in Your Life. You can find that on Amazon or Kindle. I love talking to other women who just get it, right? And they understand that the perils that we're facing, a lot of it we inflict on each other. And I think we just need to just love each other. I think we just need to be happy for each other and not see motherhood as a competition or our bodies or any of that. You know, there's just too much of that. And we ladies, we got to stick together. So check out CherieBurton.com. I've got a retreat coming up in October that I'm getting ready to share a little bit more about. So I'll be updating my website on that. That will be a Stand, Speak, Shine, more of a silent retreat. And then also I've got some online courses and some Soul Essentials cards and just some fun stuff. So you can even opt into my website and check out my free Soul Essentials kit, which is a multisensory healing kit that you can download in digital form on my homepage. Have a great week, and we will catch you next time.